Welcome to this video. My name is Beckham. Presenting an image in monochrome with colour showing through in just one location can be a very powerful technique. But the reason to do it shouldn't be just because we can, or that we've just learned a new Photoshop technique. To be successful, there does need to be some logic and reason to what we're about to do. It can't be just as simple as pick an image, take away the colour and bring it back in one spot. There are a few different Photoshop techniques to create this colour effect, but they all have some similarities in that they're generally going to use Photoshop's layers in some way. For example, with the image I've currently got open in Photoshop, we could use an adjustment layer. If we go down to the center bottom of the layers and click to select the adjustment layer, from the options we have, I'm going to choose black and white. We do get the opportunity to adjust the sliders to adjust the type of black and white we're going to get, but for this brief demonstration I'm just going to close this down. I'm going to take you back to the mask. You can see a mask has been created to the right of the adjustment layer. So I can mask the effects of the adjustment layer, and those effects are a black and white conversion, to allow the colour from the background layer to show through. If you look over to the left hand side at the bottom of the toolbox, you can see black is my foreground colour. I've got a soft edge brush selected from the toolbox. Looking up at the top of the screen, for the moment I'm going to make my opacity and flow 100% because I don't actually want to demonstrate with this image. I just want to do a very brief amount of painting to demonstrate that as I do so I can reveal colour in just one strategic area. Now in normal circumstances we would probably make the image much greater by zooming in, much greater in size, and then we can do this work very carefully. So that's one of the methods we can use. Another, if I just drag that down into the bin for a moment, is we can make a copy of the layer we have here. I can use Ctrl J for that. So what I could do here is make this image black and white. We can do that via Image, Adjustments and black and white, very similar to what we saw with the adjustment layer. You could argue that what I'm doing here is exactly the same as an adjustment layer, but it's just a manual way of doing it. So once again you can make adjustments to your black and white, but for this demonstration I'll just select it as is. Now you can see I've got a black and white sitting over the top of a colour, so all I need to do is to apply my mask manually. We do that from the bottom leftish of the layers window. There's the mask. Now we can use the same brush, spraying black to reveal the colour where we want to reveal it. And as long as we save this as a Photoshop file, of course, all of the layers and the masks are retained. So there's a couple of ways we can create strategic colour in our images, but if I'm going to do this, what I tend to choose is to work from a raw image via Adobe Camera Raw. Now let me take that route here and demonstrate that in more detail, because that's where we have the greatest latitude in our image editing. Now as you can see by the spinning round of the screen, I've opened up this image into Adobe Camera Raw. Before I make any changes to it, I'd like to take you down to the bottom of the screen. There's a hyperlink there. I'm going to click that because I'm going to suggest that we tick the box here that says Open in Photoshop as a Smart Object. That's going to allow me to make a copy and make one in colour and one in black and white. So I'm going to click OK to that. This is not turned on by default, so you may have to tick the box. But the next thing I want to do is to take away the saturation. Now I want to adjust the image both with a crop and with the tools above the saturation here to get a contrasty black and white with a fair degree of impact. I'm going to start by looking at a crop. I'm going to go up to my crop tool at the top left and select it. What I want to do is to try to tighten up the composition on the balloons that you can see there. And as I bring this image down, you can see I've got a nice little dark area up here, and I think that's going to be beneficial. That will hold that top corner in nicely, and you can see I've improved the composition there. I think I could possibly even lose a little bit of the bottom. We're all going to choose something slightly different, I'm sure. I'm going to hit the enter key to commit that change. So now I need to think about some clarity and adjusting those exposure, contrast, highlights, shadows, whites and blacks if necessary. Now we can start by looking up at the histogram, because if we go up to the histogram and we place our mouse over the right hand side where we can see that gap, we can see that just below my cursor and to the left you can see the word whites. So what we need to do is probably squeeze a bit more of the white slider into the area, and you'll see this part of the histogram move to the right. We can actually click and drag from up here, but I prefer to do it with the sliders, but that's a personal thing. So if you look at the histogram, you can see I'm sliding it to the right. I'm making this quite bright. We can click on the warning there, so if we go too far we'll certainly know. So I can go quite a way here without going too far. So certainly I can go as far as that. I can drop my blacks down to give a bit more impact. I can push up the clarity. I may even decide actually to drop the exposure a little bit, because I'm thinking ahead to the fact that I'm going to emphasize the color of the balloons here and bring them through with a mask. Maybe even a little dehaze. Well, you can see we're all going to choose something a little bit different, I think. Finally, let's have a look up here at this option. I'm going to double click and bring up my Radial Filter. Now you can see the cursor, I'm more or less in the middle of the screen, but if I double click you can see that Camera Raw fits that bounding box, or it's called an overlay when we're working in Camera Raw. But with my cursor within the inside of that, I can right click and reset all the settings, because sometimes it'll read the settings we last used. What I'm going to do is touch the V key just to hide that overlay, because I'm just going to drop the exposure in the corners. I could adjust the feather, bring it down a little bit if I wanted to, but I just want to hold the edges of the image in, something like that. I'm going to open this up, and you can see it says open object, because we're opening up a smart object into Photoshop. Now once I have the image open in Photoshop, I'm going to do something about these little white areas in a few moments, but we can deal with those a little later. If you look up at the layers, we can see the thumbnail. We can also see a little symbol down here, and that symbol is telling us that this is a smart object. If I move my cursor to the right and right click, I get an option to make a new smart object via a copy. Now it's quite important we do that, because I'm going to select the bottom layer of the two, and I can now double click this and open it back up into Camera Raw. But any changes I make to this layer is not going to impact on this one. So this one now I can concentrate just on the color that I want to bring through. So let's double click. There it is opened up. I can bring my saturation back, and I can decide what I'm going to do from there. Well, I could push the vibrance a little bit. Maybe I could just raise that exposure a little bit to give a bit more vibrance to the balloons. You can see a little bit of a problem beginning if I go too far, so I think that's probably about as far as I need to go. That's all I need to do here, I think, and I can click OK. When it's adjusted, now we've got much the same as we saw in Photoshop with our adjustment layer and the other method I used where I had two separate layers. So here we're doing much the same thing, we've just got more flexibility, because at any time I can take either one of these back into Camera Raw and I can make a change, and I can make 100 changes and I'm not going to affect the quality. Alongside the smart object on the top of the layered stack, I need a mask. So once we've got the mask selected, now we've got to do the work on those balloons. Now I'm going to choose to zoom in on these balloons, and I'm going to use shortcut keys for that, Control and the spacebar held together, click and drag. I need this to be fairly big. I'm not going to use a selection here, I'm going to do this manually, and I'm going to use a method which I call shift click. It's quite quick, but I will demonstrate how it works. With black selected as the foreground colour, I'm going to select a soft edge brush. It's just a basic soft edge brush, and I'm going to drop the size of the brush down to something like that. I'm going to leave my opacity and flow at the top of the screen both at 100%, and when I click on the edge you can see I'm masking through the coloured image on the bottom of the layered stack. What I've effectively done here, if I just show you this for a moment, I've put a little spot there on the mask. That's made part of this layer transparent. That allows the colour to show through. Now I can just move a little distance, hold the shift key, and I can paint between two straight lines, and you can see that with something like this it wouldn't take very long at all for me to go around the edge of a subject that I want to mask. And that's all there is to it. So remember, click, hold the shift key, click, click, make short steps and you'll go around curves without any difficulty at all. You can see when we're around this edge, if I tried to use a selection I probably would be struggling a little bit, but that is one option you could try. But I find I want not only the satisfaction of doing this really carefully, and I'm doing it quite quick and dirty while I'm talking, but I like to take care and make sure if I'm going to create this technique it will, what I call, pass muster. And what I mean by that is it will be good enough even if we printed the image something like 3 foot on the long side. So all I would do is take my time and go around the outer edge of these balloons. Now as you can see here, I've gone ahead and gone around the edge of the balloons. Now because my balloons are isolated in front of a black or dark background, it does make the technique I'm using here quite forgiving. But of course not every subject we apply this technique to will be quite the same as this. And I do need to spend a little time because I'm going to actually colour all of the strings at the top which are holding the balloons in place. But for the moment I'm going to flood in the inside edge of all of these balloons and see how it looks. So I'm going to hold the Alt key and click my mask, and there you can see more or less where I went round the edge of the balloons. So to flood the inside, I think I can do this fairly quickly by picking up my magic wand tool from the toolbox and clicking inside the shape, using Control and spacebar to zoom in, because you can see that the selection is a little bit off. I need to bring it a little bit this way, so I need to expand it. So I need to go to Select, Modify, Expand. How many pixels do I need? 1, 2, 3, 4, probably 8, 6 or something. 8's too many. Control Z, I'll go back, Select, Modify, Expand. Let's try 5. That'll do nicely. If I hit Control 0, you can see what I'm about to do. Black is my foreground colour. I've got a selection in place. Alt backspace will flood my foreground colour. Control D will remove my selection. And when I come back to my layers and turn them on, I get the first look at the colour coming through the black and white. Now probably one of the hardest parts is to do the strands that we've got here. We just need to be careful and work methodically, but remember, whenever you're painting on a mask, the beauty of working on a mask is if we get anything wrong, we can go back to the toolbox down at the bottom, we can switch black for white, and if we go back to that brush, there you can see I can remove the mask. I was going to say remove the colour, but I'm not removing the colour, I'm just removing the effect of the mask. So you can see it's quite quick and easy, and with that shift click method you'll find even fine detail like this is quite easy. So what I'm going to do, I will zoom into that little bit. That's a bit too far, so I'll drop back down a bit. I'll show you how I would go about doing that, but then I'll continue and finish off. The brush I've selected here is probably a little bit on the big side, so I may need to drop the size of that down, and I've got to remember that I've switched my colours around, so if I touch the X key I'll bring the black back to the foreground, and I can click. I'll drop the brush a little bit, hold the shift key and click, and now you can see I've probably got to make the brush a bit smaller. I may have to go up and back. Let's see. Click, 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 click. I need the brush a bit smaller now. Just taking it gently, one step at a time. May need to come back round here and expand the thickness of it as we come down here. But there you can see that's probably one of the more delicate parts of the colour. I'm going to continue and finish off. So there's my masking complete. And the reason I like this method is because now I can see the colour in relation to the monochrome. If I wanted to make any changes to the monochrome, which is a distinct possibility, I know I can select the monochrome smart object layer, double click, have that open into Adobe Camera Raw pretty quickly. For example, if I wanted to put a gradient from the top down, maybe just to add a bit of darkness up there, I'll go inside, right click and reset it, touch the V key just to hide that overlay. Nicer, I think, to see the effect. All I'm doing is just hiding that in a little bit. Maybe I'll even do one on the right hand side. You're not seeing the overlay at all there because I had the V key pressed, but you can see what I'm doing. Just darkening that down a little bit. You get the idea. The sort of things you can do without any impact on the quality, and when I click OK, the image is updated exactly where it is, sitting above the color version. Now what I'd like to do is a little bit of cloning or a little bit of healing, and I've got 3 white areas here that are a little distracting, and maybe a couple of streaks up on the top left corner. Now the problem with smart objects is if I select that black and white and I select my spot healing brush, well, there you can see you've got a no entry sign. We would have to rasterize this layer and move away from the smart object status. Not sure I want to do that just yet. I would rather like to save this as a Photoshop file just as it is and look at it again in the cold light of tomorrow morning just to make sure I'm happy with what I've done. But if I wanted to just deal with these to see how it looks, one way to deal with that, if we want to leave this image as a smart object, is to put a new blank layer over the top, to tick the little box at the top there that says sample all layers. Now there's my brush in play, so I can easily do this one and this one, and probably if I just make my brush slightly bigger and one tap, that's dealt with that. Up at the top left I can do the same, just drag down to just take away that little distraction. Well, there we have it. Now I have saved my image in layered form because at some stage we would go to the top here and choose flatten to finish. As you can see by the spinning round of the screen, my image is now isolated in Photoshop, but without any of the toolbox or the layers on the right hand side getting in the way. If you want to view your images like this once you've completed them, just touch the F key a couple of times and it'll scroll through 3 different views back to where you started. And what I've done here with the outer edge is to put a 2 pixel line in a mid-tone grey just to pick out those dark areas from the black background. And when I touch the F key once again, there we are back into Photoshop. So touching it once takes us to that. Again gives us that nice clean evaluation screen, and touching it again brings us back. So like many of our photographic techniques, I think it's okay if we use this in a measured way. This image and the technique, which involved a filter effect as well, was intended for a slideshow sequence called Civil War. I think one of the other important aspects of strategic colour is to try to create that colour in a compositionally strong position.